Hi, I'm Marangella from Vertex Effects, aka the Rig Doctor, and today I'm here to talk to you about a pedal that you absolutely need on your pedal board. It does so many things. It can act as a tonal enhancement for your guitar, it can act as a second channel to your overdrive, it can act as a clean boost, a treble boost, a bass cut, a bass boost, seemingly anything that you want it to do, it can do. It is the Swiss Army knife of pedals. It's none other than the graphic equalizer. Graphic EQs. Why are they so valuable, and why am I calling this the absolute essential that really every board should have? Well, there's several reasons why. One is that you can use a graphic EQ up front to help shape your guitar tone. And in fact, I saw a really cool video of Tom Bukovac, one of my favorite session musicians based out of Nashville, where he was showing how you could use a GE7 to essentially take a humbucking pickup and simulate like a TV Jones or a Filtertron style pickup just by carving out the EQ in a specific way. I want to show you that just here for a second.
Like you can turn the neck pickup of a 335 or a Les Paul, which is usually a pretty woofy sound, instantly into a Gretsch by doing this, cutting the 400 but boosting the bass and then boosting the top. And then you do this. Clarity.
Now, not only is that a really cool way to use it, but also you could just leave all of the different faders flat and you could use it as a clean boost. You could just increase the level fader and have a pretty decently good boost for your rig. The other thing that I really think it's cool for is that you can use it as a way to transform one of your favorite overdrives. Or if you feel like you're just in a rut with some of your overdrive choices, you can literally pair an EQ with any of your favorite overdrives and be able to get so much more out of it. I like to use it to sometimes exaggerate mid-range if I feel like my distortion or overdrive pedal might be a little too scooped, or if I feel like it's something that is a little bit more mid-scooped and I want to add that mid-range back, I can always just brighten up that mid-range, add in a little bit more 800, maybe somewhere between 800 or 1.6, and really be able to bring out some more of those mids from something that might be a little bit more scooped. So we're going to demonstrate all these different applications and why this is really sort of a Swiss Army knife pedal for any board and all the different things that it can do. And we're going to talk about some of our favorite graphic EQs and also some of our favorite parametric EQs that are out there and some of the differences between them, so you might figure out which one might be great to incorporate in your rig or how you might incorporate an EQ that you already have to make it really optimal in your system. So let's first talk about using an EQ up front, kind of using it as a way to shape the guitar. By putting an EQ before any of your overdrives and keeping it a little bit closer to the guitar, it's really going to have more of an influence on what the guitar is doing and how that's affecting subsequent pedals. In that clip that I showed you a little bit earlier with Tom Bukovac, you're essentially taking that sound and then you're transforming the guitar, and then that's just going through the rest of your system. So if you're the type of guy that has to use one guitar throughout the entire gig, and you might need to simulate some different style guitars because presumably if you're playing a top 40 band, you're going to have to simulate songs that might have used Les Pauls, songs that might have used Strats or Tellys. The great thing about this is you could take the EQ and take a Strat and make it sound a little beefier like a humbucking pickup, or take something like a Les Paul and thin it out a little bit more like you'd hear with a Strat. But enough of me talking about that, let's hear it. I'm going to take my Strat and I'm going to show how I would kind of beef that up and use it as a way to kind of transform the thinner Strat single coil sound and make it beefier. Then I'll switch to my Les Paul and you'll hear how I kind of thin out that mid-range honkiness of the Les Paul and make it sound a little bit thinner. And although maybe individually these might not be tones that you gravitate towards on your own, if you're sitting in a mix with other instruments and you really need to fit in, this is a great way to surgically fit in those guitar tones so that they fit perfectly with your other bandmates, or if you're recording, it's going to sound great in a mix. other thing I love to use EQs for before my overdrive section or closer to my guitar is also for adding more gain or saturation going into certain devices. One cool way to do it is just to leave all of the EQ sliders flat and use the level knob to basically act as a clean boost that's going to hit the front end of the pedals harder. I'm going to use my dynamic distortion here and show what happens when we take the graphic EQ, we just boost up that level slider and just hit it a little bit harder with about 8 to 10 dB of boost going into it, just add a little bit more saturation and fatness. Now let's talk about another way to use EQs, which I actually think is probably more of the traditional way, which is generally after your overdrive and distortion pedals. And the reason for that is that typically you don't always want to actually do the EQ shaping up front. You want the pedals to behave as they normally would, and then you can exaggerate or cut or boost frequencies as you need them. This is typically the way that we see most studio musicians using graphic EQs. This is typically the way that we see most of our favorite players that might use an EQ on their pedal board. Typically it's an after distortion or overdrive type device. One player that we see that actually does this a lot are guys like David Gilmour. And in fact, I was reminded of this recently when we did a rig for my friend Emily Wolf, and you can check out that video of her rig build above or in the description below, where she was using an EQ paired with every single loop in her switcher. Equally, David Gilmour does the same thing. In almost every single loop of any sort of distortion, overdrive, or fuzz device, he'll pair a graphic EQ in each one of those loops so that he can actually really surgically EQ every single one of his pedals to get exactly the way that he wants it. Typically, when we're dealing with just a pedal that has a singular tone knob, say something like a tube screamer, there's a limitation to how much of the frequencies that we can adjust. It's usually a fairly limited bandwidth, and we're just sweeping between whatever those frequencies are. If you actually want to really get surgical and get in there and really boost and cut specific frequencies to really make that tube screamer pair perfectly with any amp that you pair it with, using a graphic EQ is an absolute imperative to do that. And David Gilmour, certainly from a tone perspective, is a guy that I really trust, and I think most of us trust in terms of sounding great, and this is something that he's been doing and is endorsed for much of his career. But let's see how this actually sounds. I'm now going to put a tube screamer in the mix here, and I'm going to show you what happens when we use the tube screamer by itself, and then how we can exaggerate mid-range or cut mid-range or actually use it to treble boost a little bit to get a lot of different sounds out of the tube screamer. And essentially what this is doing is taking a pedal that I love and I use all the time in a tube screamer, and the EQ is essentially providing me a second channel with a completely dissimilar EQ that I can use to really transform the tube screamer into something that it's not and get some really crazy and unique tones that it could never produce on its own. So let's check that out. Another case, as I mentioned and alluded to a little bit before, is just doing some overall tone shaping. Sometimes if we combined several different effects, maybe a boost, an overdrive, and maybe I have some other sort of octave or pitch shifting things happening earlier on in the chain, or maybe even modulation, sometimes having an EQ at the end can just give you the ability to be able to shape some of that tone and just maybe bring up some frequencies to add a little bit more presence, or to cut some frequencies if you're finding that things are peaking out a little bit too much that you find a little bit displeasing. This is always a great way to use as sort of almost like a finishing tool, or kind of like almost a mastering tool on your pedal board that you can use to shape that overdrive section and any of the pedals coming before the overdrives, before it goes into any of your time-based stuff, before it enters the amp. But the last thing I want to demonstrate for you, speaking about using EQ pedals after your overdrive section, is just using it as basically a way to emulate or imitate other types of overdrives. Now, often with mid-range oriented overdrives, like a tube screamer, for example, as we've already shown you here, sometimes we can use those mid-range boosted, more compressed type pedals to actually emulate other types of amp sounds. And I really like using tube screamer style pedals to emulate more of a Dumble style sound by taking the EQ and kind of boosting up a little bit more of those low mids, which are kind of the classical kind of Dumble style frequencies, kind of getting a little bit lower, maybe down to around 800 to 600K, boosting those up, and then maybe peaking up a little bit more at the top end as well to kind of get some of that brightness. So I'm going to show you a little bit about how I do that, how I can take something that's more mid-range boosted, again, like a tube screamer, but a lot of other mid-range oriented pedals could fit into this, and then using the EQ pedal to kind of simulate more of like a Dumble style sound. And it's essentially giving me, again, not only another overdrive channel, but allowing me to emulate or cover a lot more ground in terms of amplifier emulation that I can just use with a simple EQ. So now that we've talked about all the different ways that we can manipulate EQs to not only change the guitar sound, to use as a boost, to use as an EQ shaper for kind of a finishing tool for the overall rig, or for a second channel of any ordinary overdrive, I want to talk about the different types that we see. Now today we're using an exact tone modified GE7, and what I really love about this particular EQ is firstly it's analog, but secondly, they've modified it so that you can have specific guitar-related frequencies that you're manipulating when you're manipulating those sliders. Generally, when you get a stock EQ from Boss, it's kind of a little bit wider range of EQ that's made to go across a lot of different instruments, maybe not just specifically guitar. Because typically guitar speakers are not putting out the full range of EQs that are available there. We're typically getting a much more limited bandwidth when we're talking about guitar amps and guitar speakers and the frequencies that they can actually produce. But a lot of other EQs that I like that are also great are just standard MXR EQ pedals, like the 6-band and the 10-band. Those are analog, really well made, really great budget price pedals. But another one that I like if you want to get into the digital realm is made by Source Audio, and it's actually programmable. So you could simulate infinite numbers of EQs that you wanted to have, and you can actually mix it to have it pre or post if you're using it in the context of a switcher. Again, all MIDI programmable, so you can pretty much have an infinite number of EQ pedals in one box to do it, but that is digital. I also want to talk about parametric EQs. These are a little bit different than the normal graphic sliders that we see on things like the GE7 or any of the other EQs that I've mentioned so far. These are using knobs to really get surgical into certain frequencies and not using sliders like we normally see on the GE7. And in some ways, I would say that this is more accurate than the generalized kind of GE7 style where you have the different sliders that are sliding between kind of broader ranges of frequency bands. This is allowing you to get a little bit more surgical with that parametric EQ, really get into specific frequencies and being able to dial those in a little bit better. One that I really love is made by Empress. It's called the Para EQ. I actually put one on Tosin and Bossy's rig, and if you want to check out that rig, you can check it out above or in the description below to see more about how we implemented it there. But that's also another alternative if you didn't want to go with the slider style EQs and you wanted a parametric EQ. Little tougher learning curve, a little bit different to use, but if you're familiar with a lot of studio and rack gear, I'm sure that you'll take to it like a fish to water. It won't be a problem for you to get that implemented. But if you're kind of a moron like me and you don't know a lot about how to use pedals, you're going to be able to get right into the graphic EQs like the GE7 and feel pretty confident right away that you know what you're doing. And if you wanted to upgrade with one of those great exact tone models that kind of narrows the frequency band to stuff that's specific to guitar, that might be a great way for you to be able to get into this, have a great pedal that's designed specifically for guitar and the frequencies that you're normally going to be manipulating. So do check those out. I'll list all those in the description if you're interested on where to find any of those types of EQ pedals. If you enjoyed what you saw today, I highly recommend you give us a thumbs up, you subscribe, you hit the bell icon. That's going to keep you up to date with all the latest and greatest stuff that we're coming out with every single week. If you want to support us even further, we have several ways that you can do that. You can join us for long-form conversations over on the Rig Doctor podcast. That's available from Apple, Spotify, and all the common podcatchers that are out there. We also have paid subscriptions through Patreon that range from $4.99 up to $50, and you can select whichever one might be appropriate for you, and it gives you exclusive deals and discounts on Vertex and Rig Doctor products, gives you early access and some behind-the-scenes related stuff, and also allows you a private Q&A that we do every single week with our membership. We also offer consulting services over on therigdr.com, in addition to all the pedalboard materials that we talk about and use in all of our pedalboard build videos, from zip ties to tie-down mounts to our signature power grip Velcro, all of our pedalboard surfaces, etc. Or you could go over to vertexeffects.com and buy one of our guitar pedals. We sell all of our pedals there, or you can go get it from one of our authorized dealers, which are all listed again on our website. Thank you so much for watching. I really enjoyed kind of going through this with you with the graphic EQs, parametric EQs, talking about the benefits, where to use them, how to use them, and where it can really be used into your rig. If you have any questions or further clarifications that you need, feel free to throw a comment down in the comments below, and we'll be sure to get back to you on best practices or whatever clarifications you may need. Until next time, I'm Mason Marangella from Vertex Effects, aka The Rig Doctor. See you later.